trained in one direction, because if they are, it's often very challenging for them when they have an accident, or if they don't make a team, or they move on after their career into the next phase of life, and they put all their eggs in this high performance basket. The brain chemistry and the physiological things in our entire makeup, they don't know how to handle going from 5 to 8 hours a day with a team, a coach, a physician, a person arranging to travel, a masseuse, moving from there into the next stage in life. And that's been a study that I've called the Aging Athlete Project, which I've been on since 2009, and it was recommended. The idea of this study was recommended by an orthopedic surgeon who's been the team doctor for many high performance sports, including surfing and beach volleyball. His name is Dr. Bill Gallivan. I'm 57. He's 2 to 4 years older than I am, and still working away as an orthopedic surgeon, replacing parts on athletes and regular people in Santa Barbara, California. So Stephen, you as a competitive cyclist got to know some very infamous and famous people along the way, along with perhaps their doctors and their teams and their coaches, who are often ingrained with the motto from the corporate ethic of win at all costs, because that's how we're going to pay for the team. We have to win to keep ourselves and our sponsors happy. So if possible, could you share a little bit about how you started to learn about that power structure in the sport of cycling?
Well, I spent quite a few years, well, say from 1989 to 93, just riding in the States on professional teams. So, well, I'll go back a couple of steps. My first professional was in Europe in 87 and 88 with the big teams over there, and a few in cycling. Then Europe is like the NFL of pro cycling.
And some really nice mountains that are just a train ride away from any town you could be in France. There's the Pyrenees and the Alps not far away, correct?
Yeah, well, mind you, if you live in Bordeaux, it's a long way to get over there.
Where were you living mainly?
I was based in Belgium.
Belgium.
Well, first year I lived in England. The second year in Belgium.
And then you moved to Boulder.
Correct. Yeah.
That's
first year was in LA.
Oh, wow.
I lived in LA. Yeah. So I was doing a lot of riding in the Malibu Mountains there.
So the years,
that was really nice.
That sounds nice. The years you were in Belgium, from what I remember, that would have been the year that Le Mans, the 2 years Le Mans was recuperating from his turkey shooting incident.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah.
Did you meet him before the incident?
No, I didn't know. I only knew of Greg. I do recall in '88. We did a small, sort of late season race. Was it '88? I think it was '88. Yeah. Oh, an early season race, northern France, and I remember. I think it was one of Greg's first outings that year. But I think he lined up on the first day, but obviously he still wasn't in great shape, and didn't see him after that. I didn't see him after that.
Yeah, his comeback is interesting. I just watched the documentary on him a few nights ago, and his wife had to convince him, to give it a shot, because when he first came back, he felt like he could do a few miles, then maybe 10 miles, and then he was just falling apart. And he said, "How is this going to get any better?" And I think it was one of those mind over matter things that he just had to keep telling himself that he had it in him. Do you remember following that story, or were you involved in your own training and it wasn't as easily accessible, that story?
No, I know it wasn't easily accessible, and I didn't really follow it. You're sort of only really concentrating on your own outcomes back then. You're not really,
pre-Twitter.
Yeah, yeah,
Pre-Donald
always.
Trump telling you his thoughts as he walks out of his breakfast meeting.
Mm,
And what Lance says is that he knew in his first outing with Hino that he could have won that race that year when he was supposed to be the what is the person called when you're helping the other athlete win?
like a domestique.
Domestique, yeah. I knew
Yeah.
soigneur, that must be the healer, but the domestique helping Bernard Hinault win, and he knew he could have won that year, and then he wins the next year, even despite Hinault not being much of a domestique for him and being an antagonist. And Le Mans talks about people warning him, like the head of the tour told him to watch out for his water, his food, and the other bikers were talking about, hey, what if I just stuck a pump into his spokes? I mean, sounds like the Sopranos and the Mafia on the Tour de France. Did you ever hear about antagonism amongst people in the Tour de France?
Oh, and not only just the tour, just in some races in general. Those sort of things took place probably a lot more than what's actually even known.
Yeah, and there were no smartphones to record people on, so anybody could say anything to you back then, and it was very unlikely that an official account would get out.
Yeah, I've heard points where when sometimes you're staying in the same hotels, and you go down the dinner table, and if someone's got a vendetta against somebody, they'll wipe their plate with something, so pretty much the next day they're sick.
So you're thinking that somebody in the kitchen area might have done something to your plate, or
especially when the soigneurs, or that some of them had chefs, they would, they had access to the kitchens. They would go back there, and
the soigneur had access, the healers had access, like the massage therapists, etc. Interesting. So when Le Mans came back from his hunting incident, he won 2 tours, but then everything changed. I think that would have been the end of '89 and 1990. And is that because of EPO in the ranks, or?
Oh, and obviously, a lot of things must have been evolving in Europe back then, and obviously EPO was probably the biggest driver. The Italians had already, I would say, well, I think you have to look back a little bit sooner than that, probably the late '80s, and that, where there was a lot of Dutch riders involved in that as well, but they really didn't understand it, and they thought more was better, because then there was a period there where I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but where a lot of them were had died along the way. And they were only young.
Yeah.
And it wasn't getting reported at that. But why all of a sudden they would be dying in their sleep?
Yeah, not even out on pumping their heart as hard as they could, just dying in their sleep. So your system's out of whack with these foreign substances and excessive this and excessive that. Were you able? Do you speak Dutch?
Klein beetje.
So you could understand these Dutch people, and they're speaking more confidentially with their teammates, correct?
Yeah, I didn't have access to that, but I mean, hey, the whole cycling community in a whole, it's pretty small.
Yeah. So you hear everything. What was happening with you and your coach and your team doctor at this time, and what were some of the things that you heard, and how did you react to them?
Well, I never really. We heard about it in what were the going-ons and when I was racing in the States, but we never saw it. It never had travel to the States. So we never actually saw that an increase of that kind of caliber. But it's when I ended up going back to Europe in '94 with Motorola that's when the stories and when things were getting way out of kilter. Versus what I remember racing back in 87 and 88 in Europe, and then returning back there in 94, the way, the style, the way they raced, how they raced, it just increased dramatically.
So the speeds are going. You can see the face, like when they show the old video footage from Lance, they're talking about, you know, people's faces and seeing the pain and the exhaustion. And there were videos of him going up the sides of mountains where he didn't look like he was in pain. He looked like someone out on perhaps on a training run where they had the world by the gonads. And so everything had changed. And what did the people on your, I mean, there's people moving to your team and off of your team. How did that genesis affect your team, and the fact that you had sponsors and team doctors that were all under pressure?
Well, that's probably with the Motorola and basically Lance then being seen as the number one rider on the team, and being young and being hungry and wanting to really make it all the way. But then again, there's always pressure in it. There's always pressure back then for a team to get results. And if, you know, beginning of 94, Motorola wasn't really getting the results when it counted. You know, when I say results, not necessarily quite the win, but not even making the top 5 or top 10.
Yeah.
But then a lot of those top Northern European teams were in the same boat, because if you look back at the results, 9 out of the top 10 placings were all filled by Italians.
Was Ferrara, Dr. Ferrara, the team doctor of any of those Italian teams you just mentioned?
Yeah, no, he was. Yeah.
The time that Lance is supposed to have made the comment, it might have been 1994, about we're getting our butts kicked by these other teams. What are they on? Whatever they're on, we got to do that. Is that 94? And do you know anything about that comment?
I don't know about that comment, but that's pretty much sums it up. Yeah.
What was the next big news piece or initiation into that regimen with the secret forces of chemical substances that you saw?
For us, 95 was the year that transition, crossing that line was undertaken, and then obviously a few results spilt over from that.
And how have you shared this out in the media, your particular story?
Yeah, I think if you went and look for it, it's pretty much out there. I mean, I've only told basically pinpointed what I've done. I haven't pointed fingers at anybody. Not that some people say, oh yeah, you're the one who brought down Lance. I don't think so. I mean, I think there's plenty of other aspects out there, but I told my story, what I did, but it just happened to cross-link with his, so it sort of compounded together.
You got guilt by association on
pretty
the.
Much. Well, he did, yeah.
Who is it? Are you allowed? Well, the team doctor is a public record. Who was your team doctor in '95?
Max Testa.
European?
He was Italian, yeah.
Italian.
But he was very anti to begin with, I must say.
He was anti.
Yeah.
And
but he only really swayed to the pressure because of the riders coming to him. So he felt obligated to do the best for the riders.
I wonder how he informed himself on the what to do.
I think just study, literature. Yep. I mean, so what I've read about Ferrari, how he got it, undertook it. That's pretty much what he did as well. He used himself as the human guinea pig until he sort of perfected.
Was your coach also your team doctor also an athlete?
Max did a bit of running. Yeah.
So he tested it on himself.
I don't know whether he did, but I mean, say obviously the information started becoming more available.
Yeah.
There's more, especially in Italy, where a lot of it was getting undertaken.
So the era of performance enhancing substances, if you look at the Soviets, it goes back into the 50s in some reports. But in cycling, you could say the entire Tour de France, there was some substance being used. When I've read a lot about Le Monde, I'm looking at his personality, and I haven't seen anyone come out with anything that makes me change on my thought. That is, he seems like someone who is forthright with his account of not using any substances. Is that a statement that makes sense to you?
Well, I guess what depends on what people call substance. If means at the end of the stage, getting a saline infusion to bring your fluid levels up. Is that crossing the line? I don't know.
Yeah. I was thinking more along the lines of testosterone, human growth hormone, blood transfusions, and EPO. Yeah. The four big ones I read about.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I don't think those were so much those were sort of off the table.
Yeah. You've read the account. Go ahead.
And I don't think that would have, with Greg's morals, they wouldn't have sat well with him.
You've read about the accounts in the old Tour de France history about people having a neckerchief that's soaked in ether so that they could numb their pain, and then the French people that were fans or brothers coming up with cigarettes and hugging them, and people catching on fire at the end of their stage. So the Tour de France. Have you read the book that the American professor wrote? That was his PhD thesis. I think it's called The Tour, written in the 80s. Have you read that book?
Don't believe I have, no.
I'll email you a link to that. He talks about the history of the Tour. Having lived through this, what do you think an answer would be to this incredibly challenging 3-week event, and then all the training that goes on all year long, and all the corporate pressure, et cetera, and the media sponsorship? What is a livable thing that you think could work in terms of recovery, performance, and honesty, and doing right by these professional athletes that could possibly be worth a trial?
Well, I think looking at it, that's been evolving for some time. A lot of the stages aren't as long as what we used to have. So, if they're getting a five mountain pass in a day, the stage might only be 130, 150 kilometers. Even though you're still out there for 6 hours, it's not like it's 230 kilometers and trying to gain all that. So I guess there's a lot of factors. The riders don't race like we did back then. I mean,
you race more frequently.
Oh, all the time. I mean, you would go back to the 80s, and that riders would pretty much do a pre-season training, and then specifically they'd just carry on racing as much as they could to get in shape. But these days, everything has been broken down, like nutrition-wise, training-wise. There's so much scientific element goes in behind it. To me, it's I'd say today's athlete, it would be more mentally challenging than it was back then. You know, like you could go to in our day, you could race. You know, if you're based in Belgium, you could go to a race every day. But if you felt bad after a couple of hours being a little kermesse or whatever, well, you just pull out and go home. It's no big deal, but at least you've done something. But that's the way of getting fit without just riding along.
Mm-hmm.
But these days, these days that the riders aren't sort of that way inclined. It's everything is programmed to come up to a finishing point.
The notion of training is when you look at these people like the Lance era, Pedro Delgado, these people, they're, as you mentioned, they're less competitions. They're gearing up for one or two or three of the 3 Grand Tours. So everything's specialized training, but that doesn't mean that they are not watching their weight perhaps 90% of the year, if not more. Is that correct?
Yeah. Everything's taken into account now. I mean, to say when you're everything you can determine everything. There's hardware, software, and that can monitor it. You know, and then you've got somebody else looking at it, or a couple of people looking at it. Would be like being at a Formula One race and watching all these guys in the pit with their headphones on, looking at screens all day.
Yeah.
It's pretty much where it's at.
Yeah. Everything's accounted for and assessed and programmed and researched.
Yep.
Wow.
Correct.
How did you make the transition? You said for a few years you weren't doing much in the way of physical activity. Are you now?
Yeah, I guess when I finally stopped, still being in the 30s, you still keep your shape reasonably well, and all my energy was going into the business that I was undertaking. But as the years rolled by, I sort of got the hunger to do a bit of riding again. I tried to do a bit of running, but it didn't really work too well for me. So now I still try and do a bit of riding. It's obviously changed a lot. It's more on a fun basis or on a touring basis. So still do some relatively big days, but yeah, I mean, I just don't have the last probably 5 or 6 years. I just don't have that desire to go real deep and real hard all the time.
Do you do
it's
any,
more about just enjoying it.
Do you do any stretching or fitness type things?
Well, I've tried a few of those concepts. Yeah, I should do more, but yeah, I still keep myself occupied work-wise, so that sort of takes the line.
You're not flipping channels, as it were.
No.
So the one thing I forgot to ask is when the high performance years are getting so much science built into it, and there's all of this risk. What do you think the idea should be in terms of honesty and integrity in the professional sport of cycling? A friend of mine who follows it very closely, he said if Froome and the other gentleman from England who won the Olympics and the Tour de France, if these people are beating the times of Armstrong and Delgado and other people in previous years, sometimes significantly, his opinion is that there's got to be even better use of things like EPO and undetectable chemical agents. So First of all, is that a valid opinion that if they're beating times, that it's likely that they're doing something as well?
It wouldn't surprise me. I can't say it is for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me. But let's know that the technology has increased a lot. The equipment that'll make quite a big difference. Just the whole training regime, how they can monitor it, their diets, etc. But yeah, if everyone has access to that, then, and if there's somebody still poking their heads out of the clouds, then yeah, that would raise a valid question.
Yeah. And what do you think about the notion of honesty and integrity? And what is the difference between, if everybody's using whatever they can, then it's more of a level playing field that people talk about. But then you mentioned the risk, which nobody, in my opinion, would want an athlete to suffer a permanent situation, a health issue, or death from a performance enhancing substance, even with a doctor's approval. So you've got that issue, and then you've got the honesty, integrity for the 10-year-old at home, like your son, watching this, and hero worshiping, putting the poster on the wall of this athlete, and then the athlete winds up dead from some substance, or winds up in court being sued for tens of millions, like Lance. So maybe you could share some thoughts on that. And we're just really brainstorming. I don't think there is an easy answer to any of this, but I think brainstorming from your point of view would help at least keep information out there so that people could access it.
Well, yeah, that's sort of a question that's been asked a few times. But do they take it like drag car racing? You have a one version that's actually with nitrous and everything, man. There's no limits what you can do. So
you're building a rocket out of a car, basically. When
yeah, so maybe people want riders to go down the road and watch their heads explode off, and hey, maybe that's one ticket, and then the other ticket is your different classes that guys get into. It's probably no different than I think bodybuilding went that way for a while, didn't they? Where they had sort of two different classes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably one way, but whether it would happen, no, it wouldn't happen, because it's not big enough. It's too expensive. So I mean to say, yes, they're trying to make it honest and integrity, but there's always going to be somebody pushing the envelope. It's no different than a business. Why do businesses take on all these accountants, to try and reduce their tax? It's the same thing, everyone's trying to cheat something out of it.
Yeah. I don't have children, but I've done a lot of coaching of young people and educating of young people. What would someone like you tell a young athlete or a young person who's watching a news program where Donald Trump, businessman, is talking about his business, and there's a lot of lying that goes on in politics and business? What does someone like you tell a young person so that they can be wary of that as they're dealing with people their age, and then eventually when they get their first job or their first competition in athletics?
I think if you're talking about young kids in general, up to a certain age, those sort of things probably don't even exist to a high degree. So it'll be pretty level playing field. But it's when, as soon as there's money involved, that's when the game changes.
The reason I wrote book number 3, called Raising a Child Athlete, with a question mark at the end, is because the speaking to retired athletes who are in their own lifestyle right now, which I found is very often one of three things. They're a busy person at work, or they're a super mom or super dad. A lot of elite athletes can put it all on the line for one thing. So many of them transition in their 20s or 30s to being very involved with their children's lives, or they could become a couch and desk potato where they're not doing much physical activity. So when I finished that one, a person who is a parent said you have to write one for the coaches and the parents so that they can teach young people about recreation, about joy, about balance, about yoga, and just stretching during the workday, more of a balanced approach to life. So I wrote that one. What do you think that if we taught young people who are athletes at school, and we had sessions where we talked about, or we even took them out on a retreat, so they're not just doing their cycling and their stretching and their cycling exercises, but we take them out and we play badminton, ping pong, go for a walk, play frisbee or ultimate frisbee or disc golf, and we show these young people with all their friendly competitors that they can also be friendly competitors in these recreational games. Do you think something like that might be helpful in allowing these high performance athletes to make a transition, or just a student making a transition from high school to being a recreational person when there's no coaches around?
To a recreational position, it's probably a good way to start. But I mean, what I can see is sports, high level sport is always going to be with us. It's a job, it sells, it's entertainment. So and obviously to get the right people in that environment, you want winners. What I see a lot of the way the schools here are teaching the kids, it's like there's no winners and losers anymore. Everybody wins. Everyone gets a prize at the finish. So it's hard, Some of those lessons do need to be taught, that not everyone's a winner.
I see. Yeah, that is a good point. The pendulum is swung to this extreme. I'm saying teach people how to have fun with their physical body, not just necessarily get a reward for competing in something. More like when I was a kid and you were a kid, we'd go out and play soccer, and at the end we'd either be ticked off and say, we're going to get you next time, Joe, over there, or we'd go out and have a sandwich with the same people, and we'd do it again the next day. There was no prizes with our pickup games, which were pretty intense sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. So that whole different eras now, it's very hard to transition over. So I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer going forward.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, when I'm done with my latest draft of this book, do you read books, or do you have limited time or interest in books these days?
I read some books if it really sparks my interest. Yeah.
Okay. Are you still connected to your young self, your age 10, 15, 18 self?
No, sometimes I do go out and get my, if I'm hungry. I used to, until probably a couple of years ago, go out riding and that and get my, I'd say my ambitions and abilities mixed up now.
Good. So Betsy Andreu I had a chance to speak with her when I was in Hawaii, I think 3 years ago, and she said, why don't we do this interview after I'm done with my book. Did you get a copy of her book?
No, I never saw it. No.
Okay. Did you know she was writing a book?
I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any last thoughts on like that would be more like a spiritual blessing for this entire story of Lance coming out and still, wounded people in his past? Is there any blessing or a way to let that thing go, or is it so potent that it's like a dead sea that it's not going to go away.
Well, it's always it's in the history books now. It's on record, so it's never going to be there. Yeah, over time it'll take more of a backseat as as the generations carry on. But it's there. It's on record.
I guess it's something like the world wars. It just with time, people that were around in that age pass on, and then it's just another piece of history. So that's probably a good way to look at it and to wind down our talk right now. Unless there's anything you want to share about your innovative company that you're involved in.
It's hard work.
What's your website for your company?
Enviroplaze.com.
And spell that for people.
ENVIROPLAZ.com.
And so you're taking recycled material and you're using that in buildings and in sidewalks and anything that involves aggregate and concrete, correct?
Well, yeah, not quite exactly. What we've developed is basically the whole range of commingled plastics, which is the whole entire waste stream. Not the ones that they promote here that you can recycle is primarily 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. Remember, there's a multitude of different types of plastic out there, but we have developed a way where we can use every aspect of every type of plastic, and have found a way to turn it into just like a piece of aggregate and actually act like a piece of aggregate. Because the other secret is actually for the cement paste to actually adhere to the aggregate, because without that there's no strength. So we've now got all that. We've done multitude of testing. It's the system works. The benefits are we can make concrete lighter, more flexible. So it has a whole range. We can actually change the structure of the aggregate when we build it, so we can actually make hollows in it. So when you do add it, it actually can create an insulating factor. So the next phase is actually raising the capital to build a plant and produce it and get it out there.
I'm sure the people that build things in Colorado, where you hung out for some time, would appreciate that in their frozen buildings and frozen sidewalks. That would have some incredible applications over there.
I'm pretty sure we are talking to a company in the States at the moment who've invested a chunk of money into us and are quite interested in it. So these things all take time.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So it's been a pleasure to hang out with Stephen today, Swart, and to hear a bit about his story. And if you folks listening would like to leave a thumbs up, we'd appreciate it, a like, and any comments you have that are respectful or fun down below, and see if we can share some thoughts based on your comments. So I'm Sifu Slim in Santa Barbara with Stephen Swart over in New Zealand, and keep on training, moving, and learning, because that's what life is all about. So
I think that's a very, very valid point that you just made there for the older generation, is to keep on moving. There's a lot to be said in that.
Fantastic. And when you get to I'm around the world, Europe in the summer, when there's no this required.
Yeah.
I'm in Europe in the summer, and I've been in Vienna and in Germany and Kitzbühel, Austria, which is at altitude. So doing some aging athlete altitude training and learning German. I had the good fortune to spend some time learning French and Spanish, and now I'm jumping into the hardest language I've ever learned. You and your Dutch would probably have an easier time with German, but So yeah, we'll keep in contact, and I hope I get a chance to ride a few laps around the lake with you at some point in the future, Stephen.
Sounds great. All the best. Thanks, Sifty.